only applies to monetary matters. Is that true? I not heard that.
Does that include housing benefits?
I think we should move on. I think we should move on to a safer topic. No.
Jeremy, I thought Dafka doesn't apply to monetary matters.
Yeah,
I'm getting the.
Look, on a more serious note, it is we've taken the line the whole way along, which I think is the right one. We've got to do the right thing for our shul and our kahila. People do all sorts of things. You have to just keep doing the right thing, and we certainly hope to be legally able to regather in numbers, please God, in the near future. Okay. That's a different shift for a different time. But off for this evening. We are going to begin with the we're going to talk about the question of Kivod Avayim and elderly parents. Let's just ask. Okay, fine. If you're joining me, please put yourselves on mute so we can all concentrate. Yeah. So we're talking here about what's the connection to the parsha. Let's begin with that. So although by the way, do you have the sheets? Yeah, we sent them around. Has everyone got people who want? Yeah, you've got it. Good. Okay, excellent, fantastic. Right. So we the Bereshis in the pasuk says at the end of the parsha, the truth is the whole of the parsha really is questions and dilemmas about Kivod Avayim. It's actually a fascinating way of learning the parsha. If you want to go through the whole of Toldos, you can go through it through the lens of Kivod Avayim. When is it right? When is it wrong? Yaakov, should he have listened to his mother? Should he not have listened to his mother? All of these dilemmas actually through the whole parsha. But particularly the end of the parsha, we have this idea when Yaakov leaves and goes to Padan Aram. So it says, Rashi says, the next source, that after he receives the brachos, so he was actually hidden in the base Aver for 14 years. But he wasn't punished for them b'schus haTorah, in the merit of learning Torah. Because we know Yosef separated from his father for 22 years. From the age of 17 to 39, because there was 22 years when Yaakov separated from his father and wasn't able to honor his father. So what you have here is there's this very long Rashi at the end of the parsha. I've really just taken a tiny little snippet of it, where Rashi goes through the whole calculation of how it works out the number of years of Yaakov's life and how long he was away from his father. But either way, what you see is that at the end of the day, he spent a significant amount of time away from his parents when he wasn't able to honor his parents. And for all of them, he actually received a consequence, a very tragic consequence, in the sense that his son's son was separated from him for the same length of time. The only thing was, there was the 14 years when he went to learn Torah, when he wasn't punished for. From there, you see that there are circumstances where there can be a justification for not honoring one's parents, in the sense that not that it would be to be disrespectful. There's a difference between kavod and mora, right? Honoring and respecting. There's a whole piece there as well. But what we see here is that the Gemara Megillah takes from this, Amar Rabba Amar Yitzchak Bashum V'Amarta, source 3, Godel Talmud Torah Yosem Kibbud Avoim. Talmud Torah is greater than Kibbud Avoim. Shikolos and Shonim Shal Yaakov Vina Beveis Aver. Loy Nenash. All of the 14 years, those years Yaakov was in his father's house, in the house of Abel learning Torah, he was not punished. So you see, the Gemara points out from there that, in fact, studying Torah is in a sense greater than Kibbud Avayim. But for our purposes, because that's not really the topic of for this evening, we, in the sense of that a dilemma over when your parents say, don't go back to yeshiva and you say, I want to. That's the question of Godel Talmud Torah Yosem Kibbud Avayim. That's a different question. But what you see, though, is the issue of when you have a sort of dilemma or moral dilemmas in terms of Kibbud Avayim. In the normal run of things, obviously, it's straightforward. Of course, one always has to honor one's parents, but sometimes there are situations where it becomes incredibly difficult, and where a child cannot necessarily meet the parents' needs to the extent that they would wish to. And when that is the case, one has to know what are the limits and extent of Kibbud Avoim, and how far should one go in terms of in those different situations. And obviously, this is this is like a lot of the things we deal with is obviously a very sensitive, and it's also it's a case specific situation. Obviously, every case is different, but it's also helpful to understand the background and the principles that are involved. So that when situations arise, one understands the basic picture, and from a hashkafic and halachic perspective, what are the issues that are involved. And the main source for this is Gemara in Kiddushin, a fascinating story in the Gemara in Kiddushin. The Gemara in Kiddushin says the following thing. Rav Asi, this is source 4 on the sheet. Rav Asi Havale Imozakein, Rav Asi had an elderly mother. Omrele, she said to him, Bo'ino tachshitin. I'd like jewelry. I want jewelry. Ovadlo, he made jewelry for her. He made sure that he would provide her with jewelry. Bo'ino Gavra says that she'd like to remarry. Obviously, she was presuming an elder widow, and she said, "I'd like to remarry." Na'ayin loch. He said, "I'll look into someone for you." Then he said, "Bo'ino Gavra." Then she said, "Bo'ino Gavra the shapek avosech. I want a man who's as handsome as you." Shavki left her the Ozal la'arad Yisrael, and he went to the land of Israel. So, at some point. It's to a certain perspective, and I put the English specifically in the sheet is based in the Koran, I think, translation. The difficulty with English, of course, is that it always has to take one particular pshat in the Gemara, otherwise it would make no sense. It has to give one line towards one way of understanding the Gemara, and it gives the mainstream pshat in the Gemara. It's not the only one. Maybe we'll see a different one. But this is the simple way of understanding the Gemara. That he reached a certain stage where the questions that she was asking realized that she had sadly become she was no longer of sound mind, and therefore he left her and he went to Eretz Yisrael. Now the story doesn't end there. It carries on. Shama the Ka'al Basri. He heard she was coming after him. She was trying to follow him to the land of Israel. Asla coming to Rabbi Yochanan. He came in front of Rabbi Yochanan. Amalei said to him, am I allowed to leave the land of Israel to go to outside the land of Israel? In other words, am I allowed to go? He asked just generally, am I allowed to leave Eretz Israel to go outside, to go to outside Israel? Amalei said to him, Osa. He said, it is not allowed. It's forbidden. What if I'm going to my mother, because he'd heard that his mother was coming? Maybe that allows me to leave the land of Israel. Then I'm allowed to for that purpose. Amalei said to him, he says, I don't know. So Asrach Porter Avasi waits a little bit. Hada Asi came back and asked him again. Amalei said to him, he gave a sort of cryptic answer. Isi, or Asi, sorry, Nistratzis lot says, you've decided that you want to go. Hashem bring you back in peace. Some might look at that phrase and say, that's a clever rabbinic answer. Some might have asked Shilas and have given an answer for you. Look, you've made the decision. I hope it goes well for you. Please come back in peace. And that seems to be how Rav Asi has, almost taken it, if you like, because the Gemara carries on. The English for this is on the next page. Yeah, he came in front of Rabbi Elazar. Amalei said to him, "Chas v'shalom dilma mirtach rosach." Maybe he's angry with me. He sort of said to me, you determined to go. At least come back in peace. Amalei said to him, "My Amalek, what do you say to you?" Amalei said to him, he said to me, "May Hashem bring you back in peace." He said to him, you don't have to worry, because had he been angry with you, then he wouldn't have given you a bracha in that way. Whilst this was going on, he heard that sadly his mother had passed away, and he heard that her coffin was coming. They were bringing her for burial in the land of Israel. Omri said, had I known, I would not have left. Had I known, I would not have left. I would not have left Eretz Yisrael. Seemingly because in the respect, at least, of once she had passed away, he wasn't able or perhaps obligated to leave Eretz Yisrael in order to honor his mother. Yeah. Now, this is the Gemara. This is the Gemara. I said this is the main piece which describes, which seems to describe a situation where, due to it basically seems to be taken as the mental capacity of one's parents, one is not able to honor them oneself. And therefore the key question is, at what stage is a child able to say, look, I need to hand over this to someone else? To put it in very crude terms, it's the dilemma which often sadly faces many people, which is at what stage is it not legitimate? Can a child say, look, I really need to consider, maybe they need care, perhaps a care home or something like that? This seems to be the question of the Gemara. The Rambam certainly understood the Gemara in this sort of way. The Rambam is Hilchos Mamrim Perek Vav Halacha Yud. It's source 5 on the sheets. It says Rambam says like this: Misha nitra for daito shel oviv o shel imo, one whose father or mother sadly lost control of their mental faculties. Mishtadel in hogi moem kafi daito. He should try and conduct himself with them according to their mental condition. Until Hashem has mercy upon them. In other words, he has to do his utmost to look after them in the best possible way, and to just work with them in the situation they're in, the honor that they deserve. But if it's impossible for him to remain with them, because sadly they have lost control of their mental faculties, they become very, very unsound mind. He's not able to manage anymore. He can leave them and go elsewhere. Then and he should tell others to look after them, koroi lahem, as befits them. He has a responsibility to make sure they are looked after by those who are able to look after them. Right now, if you read the Rambam again, we struggle a bit because we sort of read that with contemporary, almost like contemporary eyes. Nowadays, when we think, okay, well, what the Rambam obviously means is that someone else can look after them and he can't look after them. But the Ravid has a very basic question on the Rambam and this Rambam. He doesn't understand. He disagrees with the Rambam completely. He says like this. This is source 6. Apologies, no English here. He says like this. The first line is he quotes the Rambam. And then it's about halfway through is Omar Avram, which is the Ravid. The Ravid says, this is not a correct ruling, he says, because if he leaves them, and if he just leaves them alone, right? Who is he going to ask to look after them? So there's a bit of, he seems to be saying that what's going on? If he's going to leave them, who's he going to ask to look after them? So what does he mean? What's his question on the Rambam? So the Taz understands like this, that the Ravid's question on the Rambam was a very simple one. Yeah, the Rambam rules that a child is legitimately allowed to hand over the care of one's parents to someone else, right? So the Ravid's question was, if the care is manageable, then surely the child has that responsibility, right? If the parent is unmanageable, then what's the value in handing over to someone else? That was the Ravid's problem, right? That was his question on the Rambam. Yeah, he's look at it simply, and you say, hold on a minute, either it's manageable or not. If it's manageable, the son should do it, the child, right? If it's not manageable, so then no one can manage. So what is this? What is the question? What is the question? And in order to explain the Rambam's position, which, by the way, as we'll see, is the halacha in the Shulchan Aruch. Halacha is like the Rambam, yeah. So we need to look at the Radvaz. The Radvaz explains one of the main meforshim on the Rambam. He explains what the Rambam means. He says like this. It's source 7. First, he quotes the Ramish of Aviv, and he brings the story of Rav Asi. Rav Asi had this elderly mother, etc., and he left her and he went to Eretz Yisrael. Says the Rav at the end of that first line, the Radvaz. V'lo yodati says, I don't know. Loma kosav Ravid ein zohran choina. I don't know why the Rav says this is not a correct ruling. Kivod Rav Asi avad uvda b'nafshei. Rav Asi behaved in this way himself. How could he have left her and just moved away? How could he have just gone? Right? It's clearly that's the story in the Gemara. So it must be that Rav Asi had told others to look after his mother. And the answer to the Ravid's question as to what was he gaining by doing that? Because she has a very deep emotional connection to her son. Right? She's not going to be literally. She's not going to be shamed from him. She's not going to be able to. With him. She was. Unbridled in the way she would relate to him. She would ask him anything she wanted. The relationship was such a close one that she was out of control. Basically, he couldn't manage with her. Whereas with others, she would moderate her requests and demands. Right? He couldn't say anything. And also he brings another point. Firstly, other people could moderate her in in terms of her emotional state. And furthermore, he couldn't obviously tell her off because of he couldn't sort of look after her in the proper way. But others literally means to tell her off. He doesn't really mean that. He means to be able to if you like, calm her. But okay, this we'd find difficult to understand nowadays. He talks about sort of smiting her to get her to turn away from her, to try and cure her as much as possible. Manage her state of unsound mind. And he says, he says, you have many situations, we see this all the time, that a child simply does not have the capability to look after a parent in that state. He doesn't have the medical knowledge, he doesn't have the emotional state to be able to do so, basically, right? And that she won't relate properly to him. And that's exactly what the Rambam means. And from when you understand the Rambam with the way the Radvaz explains the Rambam, you can understand just how contemporary this halacha is. Because unfortunately, this is incredibly common. A situation where, although if you look at it on the surface, it seems to be, well, what's the difference? If someone can look after it, it should be the child. But there are many situations where it has gone past the child's capability to do so. And in that case, as the Shulchan Aruch paskins like the Rambam, source 8, Misha nitra for das oivei imoi, someone whose mother or father sadly lost their mind, mishtadal in hogimon kfidaitom, he should conduct himself with them appropriately, ad shirucham aleim, until he has mercy on them. Until Hashem has mercy on them. It's the same thing as the Rambam. If it's impossible, they unfortunately have completely of unsound mind. He's able to pass on to someone else. And he commands someone else to conduct themselves as is befitting. The Aruch HaShulchan effectively says rules in a similar way. He brings the Rambam, and then he brings the Ravid's question on the Rambam, and he says that a similar thing, that the son has the situations where the son is incapable of doing so, and therefore he's allowed to ask someone else to do so. So from here we see, and this is halacha in the Shulchan Aruch, in a situation where it becomes unmanageable, impossible for a child to look after their parents, either because of their extreme old age or because of their mental capacity, then it would seem that it's perfectly it's perfectly acceptable halachically to hand over their care to someone else, or indeed to presumably to be able to place them in a care home if that is necessary. It becomes when it becomes more complicated and difficult to do. But I should mention that there are others who learn the Gemara in terms of that they have a different. They learn them in a totally different way altogether. That actually the situation was that she was just very elderly, and he actually left her, and because he couldn't fulfill what she wanted, and he didn't want to transgress Kivod avo'im, so that's why he decided to move to Eretz Yisrael, because he couldn't fulfill her wishes. But that's not the way the Gemara is understood according to the Rambam, according to Shulchan Aruch. It is talking about someone who is of unsound mind. Where things become very, very complicated and very, as I said, very, very case specific, is you can have situations where the care of an elderly parent places extreme strain on the family unit, right? And that's a very common case. Rabbanim often get these questions. It's very, very common where you have a situation, unfortunately, where the question of how far it goes in terms of the care and the responsibility and the obligation. All children, that sense weighs so heavily upon them. You know, that idea of having to do absolutely anything and everything for their parents, even sometimes that can have it can create a situation where, as I said, the strain that places on the family unit because of the parent is too much to bear. And that's why knowing this background is very, very important. You have a situation in the Gemara, a story in the Gemara, where Rav Asi realized that it was not within his capability anymore. He left and he went to Eretz Yisrael. Not a simple decision to make, but that is how it's paskin in Shulchan Aruch. The other part of this, which is also relevant when it comes to specifically halachic rulings in this area, is that particularly in the case of women in Kivod avo'im, there's a whole discussion in Shulchan Aruch about that as well, where technically speaking, and this needs a lot more time to explain, of course, which we don't have because we're almost out of time, is technically speaking, a married woman is actually absolved of her responsibility of kibbud av v'em, where it would detract completely from her ability to look after her own household, right? Now, obviously, in the vast majority of situations, with the reshus, the permission, obviously with the consent of her husband, that's not going to be usually relevant. The husband doesn't want her to, to look after her parents, absolutely. But you see from that, that the idea that one must always do anything and everything, even if the family unit, God forbid, is almost collapsing because of the care of the parents, right? That's not always the right approach. And as I said, I say that with care and caution, because this is very, very case and circumstance specific. We all want to do everything and anything for care of our parents, our grandparents. That's inbuilt. It's our teva, it's our nature. But we need to understand that it is more complex than that, and sometimes one has to make a decision as to how far one can go, because one would never want, God forbid, that it would lead to the breakdown of what or undue extreme pressure on one's own family. And that's what I think you see from this whole piece. Any questions? I know we don't really have time for questions because we're going to go on to Officer Bonham in a minute, but we've got a chance for one or two. Obviously too complicated for questions. I don't know where they were. I hope this was understandable in terms of a brief overview of the main sources involved here. Okay.
Very good.
Thank you.
Okay.
So when I put Jeremy into a care home,
ask a Shiloh first. We put Jeremy in the care home. That's what I would say. Okay, pleasure. Those who like to,
Good luck.
okay, good luck. Those who want to stay or join for Officer Bonham are welcome. We move on to the next piece of our evening program on this Zoom channel. Okay, this is
You know he was going to do that.
Thank you, Rob.
okay, pleasure. Thank you for joining. As I say, I always say, everyone, in particular circumstances, always ask Shilas. These are very case specific. It's a very sensitive area, this, but hopefully it was informative.
Does this count for step parents as well?
That's a really good question. If you want, I tell you what, something. There's a fantastic sefer. Have you seen this sefer, Art Scroll, the Fifth Commandment? It's got incredible sources in, and he goes through the whole thing in there as well. So he goes through the whole issue of step parents as well. I think. Can't recall. I don't know exactly what he says here. Because you also have the question about in-laws, Johnny, as well, right?
I didn't have a question about them, that's for sure. Oh yes, of course, Rob. Yes, sure. Yeah.
Now. So
my wife is.
yes, no, joking. No, I tell you something. No, there's a whole parak in here on this. There's a whole chapter here on stepmother, stepfather. He talks about it. Yeah.
Okay.
It's seeing what he says. Yeah, it's the mother's husband. Yeah. Basically, it's a whole shtickle. What can I tell you?
Okay.
It's a whole story. It's a whole. Yeah. It's whole Megillah. Yeah. Okay. Right. Very good. All right. So I'm not going to take any more time from Officer Bonham. I'm just going to.
Okay. Thanks, Rob.
I don't know whether. Is everyone able to unmute? Aaron, is there people are able to unmute? Yeah.
Yeah, we can.
There we go. Okay.
She's talking me.
Johnny, are you running Officer Bonham?
He's
Good luck.
Good luck, Johnny.
We're just going to do the same as every week, which is basically we're going to put up a list, a Google list for you to just add your children's name on or names onto it, and then we'll do that at the end. And happy learning.
Ow.